I'm here on the ground with my nose in it since the whole thing began. I've nurtured every sensation man has been inspired to have. I cared about what he wanted, and I never judged him. Why? Because I never rejected him. In spite of all his imperfections, I'm a fan of man! I'm a humanist.
Welcome to Big Fan Podcast. If we're meeting for the first time, my name is Kevin. And today we have our co-host, Dan the Man, and a special guest, Jimi Fritz. Thank you for coming on, Jimmy.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
Thank you. I've seen all your podcasts that you're on, so it's kind of like I'm a little shell shocked or like celebrity.
Yeah, a little bit.
And so I read your book, and it's an amazing book.
Confessions of an Ethical Drug Dealer by Jimi Fritz, available at fine bookstores everywhere.
Yes. So what made you want to write this book?
Well, it's just the story of my life, really. And it was also, I have a lot of stories, done a lot of traveling, lived in a lot of different countries. And also it seemed to be intertwined with my story with psychedelics, which seemed to be a really, pertinent topic right now with all the research going on and all the media attention and all the different developments that are being done in psychedelic therapy. And so it seemed like a timely thing to write. And I also wanted to just present a more realistic view of psychedelic drug use and make the distinction that, not all drug use is negative, not all drug use is abusive. Drug use for me, particularly psychedelic drug use, has always been, has always improved and enhanced the quality of my life. I haven't ever had a problem with drugs or addiction or, needed therapy or any of that stuff. So it's always just been a boon to my existence. So I wanted to get that. And this more realistic view, I think, for myself, definitely, and for pretty much everybody I've ever known. Pretty much everybody I've ever known has used psychedelics, and I've never seen any problems with it. So, and people have this tendency to lump them together with the addictive drugs, the opiates, the crack and the coke and all that. And I've never really had anything to do with those drugs. So, it was just wanting to present a more realistic view of psychedelic drug use and put it in a more realistic and positive light.
Perfect. And like in your book, you mentioned Terence McKenna a couple times, and I would just
I slag him off a little bit.
Yeah, I just wanted to know your view on Terence McKenna.
Well, it's just that there's this real confusion with psychedelics, and because they put you in such a different state of mind, it's very tempting to think that you're entering a different dimension or another realm of being or consciousness. And I think they do within your own psychology, and I think they can be extremely valuable in many, many different ways. But I think this confusion about, Terence McKenna would talk about ayahuasca machine elves and, these beings that alien beings that you meet when you're in psychedelic states. And I just don't think there's any evidence for that and any reason to believe that any of that's true. I think it's a pure fantasy land. Not only that, but it just confuses the issue because I think they are valuable. But I think they're valuable in a psychological state, not a supernatural element. And he goes into, shamans and people pretending they're Gandalf the Grey. And, that's the last thing I want when I'm high on acid is somebody pretending they're a wizard. I think all that stuff is just, products of our imagination. And there's no doubt that psychedelics stimulate the imagination, but we still have to keep in view what's real and what's not. And I think Terence really muddied the waters in that way. He also predicted the end of the world a couple of times and was wrong.
Yeah.
And was wrong about a lot of things. He had a very overactive imagination, very smart guy, an interesting intellect, but way off base as far as I'm concerned. concerning anything supernatural or paranormal. I don't think there's anything supernatural or paranormal about psychedelics at all.
No,
Yeah,
you had
good.
mentioned that psychedelic research has been booming lately in terms of what's been going on maybe in the last 2 or 3 years. In the United States, it's already kind of been legalized in Colorado, and you could see it. It's coming, kind of, sort of coming to Oregon and California. How do you feel like that's had an impact on psychedelic research?
Yeah, I mean, you can read about it on, you're going to hear about it on CNN and Time Magazine and all these other reasons. I mean, the problem with prohibition, that these drugs have been illegal for the last 50 years, so we really haven't been able to do any legitimate research. And now for the first time, because they're loosening up the laws, they're making exceptions, they're having exemptions. The FDA has exemptions now for, MDMA and psilocybin and LSD. And these actual legitimate science, legitimate studies are going on for the first time in 50 or 60 years. So this is a huge step forward, because before then it's all just been anecdotal and people have just been making stuff up, like Terence McKenna. And it's not really useful in science to make stuff up and then believe it's true. That's not the way it works. The way it works is you test these things and you put them through, vigorous scientific testing, and then you find out. And we need to find out what they're good for and what they're not good for. And they're not good for everything. It's not like you take even MDMA. MDMA has been studied now for 25 years by MAPS. A guy called Rick Doblin at MAPS has done some really groundbreaking research. And he's been working on this for 25 years now. In the next year, MDMA will become a prescription drug for PTSD. And PTSD is a huge problem with all these soldiers coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq and wherever. And it's a massive problem. These people's lives are ruined, and there's nothing they can do about it. The talk therapy doesn't work. The drug therapy doesn't work. Nothing works. So they took the toughest cases they could find, and they're getting like a 70% cure rate, which is unheard of in a study, for neuropsychology. So it's a huge step forward, and that will be a legal drug for PTSD in the next year. So that's what can happen if you loosen up the restrictions and you can actually do the research and find out what they're good for. Now, MDMA isn't good for everything. It's probably doesn't affect a lot of conditions, but PTSD, no, it's absolute boon. It's one of the most effective treatments that's ever been discovered for a psychological disorder.
Okay. So you lean more towards recreational use, not like spiritually.
I've always used them recreationally. I've always used them to increase my perception and awareness of the world and improve and enhance the quality of my life. So for me, they've been inspirational, educational. They've opened up my mind. I've done a lot of creative things in my life, through filmmaking and songwriting and music videos and writing books. And these have all been inspired and informed by the psychedelic experience. It does make you think in a different way. It rewires your brain. It rewires your neuro pathways, and you can approach problems in different ways. A lot of psychedelics have been used in science. A lot of major breakthroughs in chemistry and biology and physics. A lot of major breakthroughs have been made by people doing LSD, because they've approached these problems, and some of them, in the regular ways of thinking, conventional ways of thinking, they don't get you there. They don't get you to these novel, innovative answers. And psychedelics let you look at it in a completely different way. They rewire the brain. You can see things in different ways that make major breakthroughs. And there's literally been, 100 or more major breakthroughs in the sciences through people doing LSD, from Microsoft to the DNA molecule to virtual reality software. All these breakthroughs were made through LSD. And people don't realize that, how much it's influenced our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention the arts and the music.
So what would you say is your favorite smart drug?
Well, I think LSD is certainly one of the most powerful agents for psychological change, and the ability to change your behavior and changes. So a lot of these a lot of these disorders of anxiety and depression, a lot of these psychiatric disorders are just people getting stuck. They're stuck in a mindset, they're stuck in a rut, and there's nothing like a little bit of LSD and a walk in the woods to break you out of a rut and to let you see something in a different way and open up new possibilities. So that's probably one of the psilocybin for the same reasons. But MDMA is is also very effective. I was involved in the rave scene for many years. And when I discovered that, it was quite amazing. I wrote a book about that too, called Rave Culture: An Insider's Overview by Jimi Fritz, available at fine bookstores everywhere. This is also, and it was, just because I saw what was happening in the rave scene. It wasn't just a bunch of teenagers doing drugs. There were people creating community and human connections that they'd never thought possible. People were making, people were having emotional connections with each other, and it was literally changing their lives. And I saw, out of the about 30 different raves that I promoted, I literally saw hundreds of people's lives change for the better, because for the first time in their lives, they were making real, authentic human connections on an emotional level. And a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people are isolated and, alone and desperate and depressed and God knows what. So, it really did break them out of that. You could just see the shell cracking. You could see the minds opening. You could see their hearts opening and these connections being made for the first time in their lives. And it's a very, very powerful experience. And so I was seeing that, on a monthly basis, because I did events every month for about 3 years. And it was quite amazing to see what was going on there. And that's what inspired that book. I thought, wow, this is something that people should know about.
And you got involved in the rave culture at age 40, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And you're 65 now, right?
66. Yeah.
66. Okay. When's your birthday? When's your birthday?
October 2.
Oh, happy belated birthday.
So, I actually haven't celebrated my birthday in about 30 years.
Oh, that's smart.
I don't actually acknowledge it. Mostly everybody I know has forgotten about it, and the people that haven't know that I don't. I just think it's kind of egotistical to celebrate, to think that the accidental, arbitrary date of your birth is somehow makes you special in some way. Right. It seems to me a shallow concept which doesn't really, map onto reality. So for me, it doesn't mean anything at all. It's just, I just let it go by. And plus, at a certain point, I mean, your birthdays when you're younger, your birthday is a milestone, and you get more freedom and you get more privileges, and your life basically gets better because you're 1 year older. So I guess it's something to celebrate for young people, but after 60, it's just a countdown to the grave.
Yes, that's exactly how
there's a lot less to celebrate.
Well, maybe that's why you look so young and stuff, because you're not celebrating the aging of
That's
time.
right. I've discovered the secret to immortality. Yeah. You just don't celebrate your birthday, and you don't get a year older.
Mm-hmm. Prince used to do that.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And that's why he's like, that's why I look so young.
Of course, he's dead, isn't he?
Yeah, but that was pharmaceuticals, well, bad drugs.
That was
questionable, yeah.
That was irresponsible drug use, and that's a perfect example right there.
Yes.
Something I picked up from you was how you talk about how the importance of proper dosing when it comes to doing psychedelics for the first time or doing something of the same sort for the first time. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's critical, right? It's, it's absolutely critical, frequency and dosage. I mean, these drugs are very powerful. And if you do too much, and if you do them in the wrong time or the wrong place, or with the wrong people, or for the wrong reasons, you can have a really terrible time. So it's absolutely critical, but it's like anything else. It's like alcohol. If you have a glass of wine with dinner, it's a pleasant experience. If you pound back a 40-pounder in one go, in a horrible situation,
Yeah.
you're gonna have a terrible situation. It's not the drug, it's the dosage and the frequency. And
Exactly.
it's particularly with stuff like LSD. I mean, you're doing, 100,000ths of a gram. It's an incredibly tiny amount. So it's very, very easy to do too much. Some drugs are much more dose specific than others, but it's all just based on your brain chemistry and your body weight. Yes, for some people, a normal dose is way too much, and for some people, a small dose is too much, and some people a large dose is not enough. So you have to really work with your own brain chemistry and your own common sense. It's not difficult to work out. The trick is you just start very low, and then you work your way up to where you want to be. And you want to be at different dosages for different experiences. I mean, if you want to go for a, nice, pleasant walk in the woods and have an inspiring conversation with a close friend, then, half a hit of acid or a quarter of a hit of acid is plenty. And if you want to have a really cathartic, experience and go a lot further, you can take more, but you've got to know what your limits are. You've got to know what your brain chemistry works with. Some people, it's like some people work with one drug and they don't like another one. So you've got to figure out what works for you. And not all drugs are for all people. And some people should never do psychedelics. I mean, if you have any kind of tendency towards psychosis or mental illness, you shouldn't be doing psychedelics at all. So it's like anything else. You just approach it with common sense. There's a lot of very, very good information on the internet. It's all over the place. Erowid.org is a site that I like to recommend because they have a lot of very, very good information on that site. But the information is out there. There's no reason for people to be making these mistakes anymore.
And you have experience with ayahuasca?
DMT, yeah. Ayahuasca is just DMT mixed with harmaline. So if you want to smoke ayahuasca, you can smoke ayahuasca. It's a mixture of Syrian rue, which is a herb which contains harmaline. And harmaline is an MOA inhibitor. It stops the enzymes in your stomach from breaking it down. Because if you just eat DMT, it won't do anything. So that's why you either have to smoke it or you have to mix it with harmaline, which is what ayahuasca is. Ayahuasca is two plants. One contains DMT and one contains harmaline, and keeps it in your system a little bit longer. Otherwise, if you just smoke it, it's a very, very fleeting experience. It's a 5-minute, literally a 5-minute, psychedelic trip. DMT is very, it's kind of problematic. It's also very, very dose specific. It's very easy to do too much, and most people that do DMT do too much, and they have these mind-blowing experiences because it really is the most powerful psychedelic there is. So that's why that's why it feels like you're catapulted at light speed into a geometric universe or something, or another realm of being, or another planet, or an alien environment. That's where these stories come from, because it feels like that. But that's not actually what's happening. It's just your brain working in a completely different way that's never worked before, and it can be very disorientating. Now, there's a new method of smoking DMT, which is vape pens. So you dilute the DMT in some glycol, vegetable glycol or whatever, and you put it in a vape pen, and that's a fantastic way of dosing it, because you can take one tiny little hit and you just get a tiny little buzz. You just feel really optimistic. It's a real reset for the brain, DMT. It's not actually the experience itself is one thing, but afterwards you just feel calm and collected, and for days afterwards, it's sort of like a reboot almost. So I don't think we've even begun to discover, the benefits of DMT, but the vape pen is the way to do it. You can take a tiny little hit, you can take a bigger hit, you can take a couple of big hits, and you can, go to see Terence McKenna and the ayahuasca machine elves.
So Jimmy, let me ask you a question though. What helps you distinguish from like taking DMT and being able to see like alienish kind of scenarios? What helps you distinguish that from reality compared to like what Terence McKenna talks about?
Well, there's evidence for reality and there's no evidence for ayahuasca machine elves, basically.
Well, I mean, we're made of atoms, so it's like a little hard to distinguish, what is real. I think our eyes are like upside down, and it's like that's weird.
No, it is. It's hard to it's hard to tell what your imagination is. Well, that's why we have that's the goal of science, is to provide an objective. Like when you test something with a scientific method, you take the person's imagination out of the equation, and even human influence altogether, because people are the most unreliable source of information.
Yeah.
Everybody's got everybody's imagination is all over the place. So you can't really rely on someone's subjective experience. You have to create other metrics and other ways of evaluating the experiences, and you can do that in a number of ways. But going by someone's imagination. I mean, otherwise you've got to give credibility to everybody that sees the Virgin Mary, or everybody that gets abducted by an alien, or it's not a good source of information. You can't take people's imagination at face value. Imagination is not a reality. It's a type of reality, but it's not the real world.
Okay. And what was the highest you've ever been, and what did you take to get that high?
So the highest I've ever been was actually the first time I ever did LSD, and it's like I say, in 50 years of using psychedelics, I've never really had a negative experience, except for that first time. I was 15 years old, never heard of LSD, didn't know what the effects were. And I took this massive dose of purple microdot. It's about 300 or 400 mics of LSD, and had no idea what it was going to do, had no idea what the consequences were, and just took it and hoped for the best. And I had a horrific experience, which I explain in great detail in my new book, Confessions of an Ethical Drug Dealer by Jimi Fritz. And I had a terrible time. I thought I was dead. I thought it was a lizard. I thought I was insane. It went on and on for 12 hours. It was one of the, it was a very, very bad experience. And I put that in the book just as an example. This is, if you do everything wrong, this is what can happen. But since, I was 15 years old at the time and never heard of LSD. So what happened was I just put that in as an example. But since then, in the 50 years since that, I've never had a negative experience, because I know, if you know how much to take and what's too much and what's the wrong situation and the wrong setting, then it's not that difficult to figure it out.
Okay. Have you ever had an experience where you thought you died?
Yeah, that first one, I thought I was dead. And I thought, okay, this is it. I must be dead, because there's nothing in this reality that I can recognize. There's nothing in this reality that maps onto anything, any experience I've had in the real world. So I must be in another world. So it's quite possible that I'm either completely insane or I'm dead. And if I'm dead, then maybe my life is going to be like this forever. So it was pretty terrifying. Then it goes gradually, it wore off. But
how long did it take to come to grips with that, though, and be like, I guess this is this?
I think I'd accepted it at one point. I think I thought, okay, well, this is it. And now how do I move forward? Right. This is my reality from now. Like, I'm living in a burrow, with roots coming through the walls and weird creatures everywhere, and this is my life now. And so how how do we just get on with it? So I did try to accept it, try to incorporate it into my reality, and said, okay, well, this is what it's going to be forever now, so I might as well live my life in this situation. I'm glad I didn't.
I had seen you talking about in a lot of your podcasts talking about rave culture, and I'd see you had talked about a lot of the times your first night out and what happens, and I've kind of seen you talk about it more in like on the other podcasts in general terms. Can you be more specific at what happened, your experiences that first night when it came to go into your first rave?
Yeah, it was a very powerful experience, and it changed my life. Because I just turned 40 and I was getting a bit jaded. I felt like I'd kind of been everywhere and done everything, and I was a bit of a slump. And then a friend of mine's kid actually came up and said, oh, there's this new thing called rave and MDMA, and it's a fantastic time and you should check it out. So I said, okay, I'll go for it. So I dropped my hit of MDMA and went into this party, which was in an ex-Salvation Army building with stained glass windows and the DJs in the pulpit. And it had been abandoned, slated for demolition. So all the walls were painted with graffiti, and the whole thing was lit up. And it was an amazing environment. The music was incredible. It was the first time I'd ever heard electronic dance music. And it was really intriguing. As a musician, I was very, very intrigued as to how it was done. So I went and stood behind the DJ for a while and tried to figure out what was going on. Couldn't do it, had no idea. So I went back to just hung around at the back of the dance floor watching this scene. All these people were just hugging and connecting and having a fantastic time. And then I came up on my E and started dancing. I hadn't danced for 25 years. And all of a sudden, I start bobbing around, and then I'm jumping up and down, and I'm just going. It was just a very moving experience. But the thing that got me most was this empathetic group mind experience that happened. Everybody was really, really, really connected on exactly the same moment in time. It was like a really powerful meditation, because previous to that, I had quite a long history of meditation, and traveled in India and meditated with gurus and Buddhist monks and whatnot. So I'd had experiences of meditation, but that night I was 100% in a state of deep meditation, like to here and now. Nothing else was going on. Everything was just concentrated in this one perfect moment of being in time and space. That was very, very powerful. And it rejuvenated my psychology. I walked out in the morning and the sun came up, and I was just very, very optimistic about the future. And it changed my life. And then I was so impressed. I got involved in the movement and started producing my own events. But it was a life changer, and it was for many, many people. That's what was so amazing, that so many people's lives were just changed by that experience, and in one night, right?
Amazing. That is amazing.
There's not many things that can do that. There are not many experiences in life that can just change the whole course of your life, forever, with one night out. So I was pretty impressed with that.
Yeah, I'm trying to register for the Native American church.
Yeah, they do. I think they do peyote. The American church, they use peyote.
But yeah, peyote.
Yeah, peyote is basically mescaline. The active ingredient in peyote is mescaline. And that's, it's a powerful psychedelic too.
Yeah. There's a book writer. What is his name? I'm pretty sure you probably remember. He's the most famous one for that. It talks about going up there to like Mexico and stuff. Don, do you know Don? What the fuck is his name?
Don Quixote?
Yeah. I read a lot of his books and stuff.
Well, they were books written by Carlos Castaneda.
Yeah. It's like
Carlos Castaneda was actually a bit of a fraud.
Oh, was he?
He didn't go to Mexico, and he didn't study with Don Juan, and Don Juan was not a wizard, and he couldn't do magic. And the thing was, he wrote it as an anthropology PhD, but he was actually, there were books written about him that proved that he wasn't in those places at that time. Don Juan was not Don Quixote. Did I say Don Quixote? No. Well, it's the same type of thing, right? It's a fictitious character. Don Juan was his bruja, which was the ayahuasquero, which is the guy that took him on these journeys and supposedly levitated and transformed into a crow, and all these fantastical stories. Well, it turns out none of that was true. And now when you buy the Castaneda books, there's a disclaimer in the front of the book saying this is a work of fiction.
Okay.
So all that was nonsense.
Well, good books either way. Yeah,
Well, they were entertaining.
Yeah.
I got pretty bored with them. I read the first three, and by the third one, I was beginning to think that Castaneda was a bit slow, because all he ever, Don Juan would say, well, what do you mean by that, Don Juan? What does this mean? He never got anything. He never understood anything. I got it all in the first half of the first book, and I figured the whole thing out.
Yeah.
He was into book 3 and he couldn't understand anything about it.
He should have been teaching you, right?
Yeah. He should have read my book.
So you wrote 2 books already, and I understand you're working on a novel.
Yep.
When do you plan on, is this still in the beginning stages?
Well, it's in the planning stages. I'm doing a bunch of research and making lots of notes. I intended to actually start writing this week. That was my start point, but I got a bit of Omicron this week.
Did you?
Yeah.
That shit's everywhere. That shit's everywhere.
It's going around.
I have Omicron as we speak.
I have COVID right now too.
Do you?
I might have it. I'm not sure, but I probably do.
I caught it the day before Christmas.
It's hard to say, but I was with a bunch of people over Christmas, and a bunch of those people tested positive, and I have exactly the same symptoms that they had. So yeah. I'm assuming that I did a rapid test and it came up negative, but the rapid tests are very, very unreliable. The other guy I was with did a rapid test twice and it came up negative, and then 2 days later he did a rapid test twice and it both came up positive. So, and
Elon Musk just got tested 4 times. 2 times came positive, 2 times came negative by the same nurse in the same exact time.
The rapid tests are really, I don't think they're of any use, really. I mean, if they're that inaccurate, I can't see that they're very useful. The PCR test is much more accurate, but you can't get one of those anywhere. I mean, I went into a pharmacy and I said, can I get a PCR test? They said, nope, nobody can get a PCR test. You can't find them. You can't get them. You can't book them. And the pharmacist actually told me that there was one or two of the staff members at the pharmacy did have COVID, and they couldn't even get PCR tests to test the rest of the staff.
No, my best friend's a pharmacist, so I can definitely vouch for that story. He could not even hook me up when I've been sick the last week with it. So it's definitely a thing right now.
Yeah. No, I think it's mutated to the point where it's not so deadly and it's not so harmful, and it's like the flu. So I think that's where we wanted to get to from the beginning, that as it mutates, it gets less severe, and then it'll just become part of the flu cycle. So I think we're almost there now, because I mean, I know a dozen people that have got it right now. It's just sweeping through like wildfire. Everybody's getting it. Yeah. But they're not getting that sick. I mean, I didn't feel great for a few days, but I'm not on my deathbed or anything.
Yeah, everybody's on their way to natural immunity almost.
Yeah, well, that's it. And eventually that will happen. If it sweeps through wide enough and everybody gets it, then we'll have the natural immunity and the vaccines, and together, we'll survive.
Yes.
That is the hope.
So,
meanwhile, we can all stay at home and do psychedelics.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I'm a big fan of mushrooms. I don't like. I'm not a fan of all drugs, but I've done like acid, LSD, and I've done mushrooms. And mushrooms are just way more funner to me. And I know like it's natural,
Yeah, I don't buy the natural unnatural dichotomy, because all chemicals are natural, but but yeah, it's different for different people. Like some people really prefer mushrooms over LSD. Some people like LSD much more over mushrooms. I like LSD better than mushrooms, but again, it's just to do with your brain chemistry and how it reacts, and you have to be sensitive to that.
So Jimmy, can you try to explain like the magic mushroom? Like how is it and why is it the way it is?
Well, it developed, the psilocybin is actually a toxin that the mushroom developed over time and co-evolved with the animals that ate it to prevent them from eating it. And it just happens that it bonds to the H2A receptor in our brain and gives us this experience. So I think that's the you know, evolutionary, the Darwinian explanation for it.
So what drug has helped you mainly with your music career?
I think probably you know, LSD, just for the stimulation of the imagination and opening up, you know, ideas and making you think in novel and different ways. MDMA is more of, I talk about in my first book, Rave Culture and Insider's Overview, I talk about you know, MDMA as being an emotional drug. So it helps people emotionally, and LSD is more of an intellectual kind of pursuit. So they affect you in different ways in that way. So different drugs stimulate people in different ways. And like I say, and everybody's different, you know. So your brain chemistry is the main you know, variation there, the variant.
I'm a big fan of you made this one song. It's called Mexican Standoff. Yeah, I really like that song.
That was a true story.
Was it?
Yeah, it was about a trip to Mexico that I went on, and my best friend came with his girlfriend, and I invited them, and she had a problem with a lot of things, and that was the story of our friendship actually breaking up.
True story.
Every line of it is true.
Yeah, that's a really what kind would you consider that, rock and roll? Or because it sounds a little like rock, it sounds like folk, it sounds a little like country-ish to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think it has all those influences in that particular song. Yeah, most of my songs are you know, they're acoustic songs, they're ballads, they're stories, they're personal experiences, and there's a kind of folk jazz, you know, folk jazz fusion ballads, I guess.
Yeah.
Someone who is has a love for Roman culture, and as someone has watched the podcast relate to your love of Greek culture, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about Stoicism and how it's been an impact on your life.
Well, yeah, Stoicism was one of the best kind of life philosophies that was ever invented, I think. And you know, it came about 300 BC. It was just 300 years before Christianity, developed originally by a guy called Zeno. And it really does answer all of life's important questions, and it concentrates on reason and logic and rationale. And the Greeks really had it down. They had the answers to all the most complex questions of how to live a good life, how to live an examined life. And then there was this crucial period where Christianity came along and the Romans took over, and they said, well, we can go with the Greeks with their logic and reason, or we can go with the Christians with their magical thinking. And we went with the Christians. And I think that was one of the biggest mistakes in human history, that it put us back 2,000 years, you know, and we're still battling against these superstitious nonsense of, you know, Palestinian Bronze Age gods. And it's time we drop that. Well, the Greeks dropped that, you know, more than 2,000 years ago. They were the first culture to give up their gods and to go with logic and reason and rational thought. And if we'd have gone with them at the time, it would be a different world today. But it's not too late. You can still read the Stoics, you can still read Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and all these things. And they're just basically very, very practical information about how to live a good life, how to live a virtuous life. And it's just basically about taking responsibility for your own actions, take responsibility for everything you think and feel and do and say. And you don't take responsibility for anything anybody else thinks or says or does. And that, you know, that's it in a nutshell, really. It's just taking responsibility for your own life and examining your own life and questioning whether you know, whether what you're doing is virtuous or not. A life based on virtue and compassion and reason and logic. And boy, if we all did that, we'd be living in a different world right now.
Have you thought about making your book audio yet?
I've thought about it and I priced it out. You know, I have friends with recording studios who gave me really good deals. It would cost about, you know, probably $4,000 to turn it into an audio book. It'd be a lot of work because you got to read the whole thing through and you got to stop and start. And then there's a lot of editing. I mean, there's a lot of text to edit. And
what about like at least like 2 chapters or something like that? I think like that would help a lot because it took me a long time to read the book because I'm not a reader. Like I don't sit down and read books. But I did, and I use Kindle, and you could get his book through Kindle. But the thing is, I would like to hear somebody read it. I'd like to hear like you and like your voice.
Yeah.
And I think that would be amazing and stuff. And like how long does it take to read? Like average?
Well, I mean, it would take probably about 10 hours to read it, and then probably times 5 for that, so another 50 hours of editing. So it's you know, and then there's the sound, you know, the sound file work and the EQing and the mastering and formatting, and you know, it's not as easy as you might think. It's not just like, oh, you just read it and it's done, you know.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit of work to an audio book. There's quite a lot of technical specifications. I looked into it. I just don't think I could sell enough audio books to make it worthwhile.
Okay. Well, in America, we're like audio people. Like I listened to your book while I was at work and stuff, you know. So
Right.
You know, and you could actually set your Kindle to make it read for you. You'd have to look it up on YouTube, but you could also that's an option.
There you go. So it's already an audio book.
Yeah. But I'd like to hear your voice, you know, that English voice. And so can you tell me a little bit about what didn't you like about England that made you wanted to go to Canada?
Well, when I grew up in England, there was a pretty depressed area in the 60s and early 70s, and I went to a horrible school, a terrible, you know, it was like a special school for backward teachers, and some horrible teachers, lots of violence, you know, people beating up teachers and fights in the classrooms, and then in the streets, you know, it was a very depressed area. I grew up in a very working class environment. There was a lot of violence, there was a lot of racism, there was a lot of poverty. It was just a totally depressed area, and I just always thought that I was in the wrong place. So I tried, you know, every chance I got out, and I started leaving the country when I was 17, and then touring Europe a lot. Spent a lot of time touring around Europe, and everywhere I went was better than England. So I vowed never to go back, and I kept that promise for about 25 years. And eventually I did go back, and it's a different country now. It's not the country that I left. It's not the country that I was bad mouthing for 30 years, telling people not to go there. It's a completely different country now. It's cosmopolitan, you know, the economy improved, and, you know, people have cars and phones and go on vacations, and it's, you know, it's a different, the country that I lived in, nobody did any of those things. And everybody was angry and bitter. So it was just a question of the time. The time that I was there was a bad time. A lot of strikes, a lot of strife. And so I was glad to get out. And Canada's a great country. It's, I've lived in a lot of different countries, and this is the best one. So I'll probably never leave Canada now. Yeah.
And then there was a story in your book. I'd like you to tell it a little bit, if you could. So your wife, Veronica, were smuggling, and she had it smuggled in her, and she had took it out like during the plane ride and put it in her purse.
Right.
Okay. Can you tell that story?
that was coming into Amsterdam. We were going to Amsterdam, and that was one of the first times I went back to, well, in this case, Amsterdam. We decided to go back to places that we'd been 30 years before and see how they changed. And we'd lived in Amsterdam a couple of times. And so we went back there, and we were meeting up with some friends of mine in England. And I'd just written the rave book. It was like 20 years ago. So I sent a copy to some friends of mine, and they said, oh yeah, we'd like to go to a rave. So I said, okay, well, meet me in Amsterdam, and we'll take you to a rave. So we figured out a good party to go to, but we needed to take some MDMA with us. So we put it inside Veronica. Got to the airport. We said, don't take it out. Okay, that was the deal, right? Do not take it out until we clear the airport. Do not take it out. She, okay. So we're in the airport with the buggy and our luggage on it and her backpack right on the top. We're going through my friend Russ, who's the subject of the song Mexican Standoff. He's pushing the luggage, and he goes, and I said, are we good? You know, everything's cool. And she said, yeah, no, I took it out. I said, what do you mean you took it out? Where is it? She says, it's in my backpack. And I see the backpack on top of the pile of luggage heading through the security door, this security gate. As he's going through, this friend of mine, I call to him and I say, bring it back, come back, come on. Like, this is really important, you bring this back. So he tried to back up. And as he backed up, he tripped the laser. All the warning lights went off, and all these customs officials came rushing in, and they're all shouting at him, and they're saying, no, keep going, don't turn back, you can't go back, keep going. So he pushed it through, and we walked back, sheepishly behind him, thinking, oh dear, there we go. And they actually just, gave us a very cursory look over. They were more interested in him because he dyed his hair white and he looked like a heroin addict. And so he kind of deflected the attention, and then we just kind of picked up our bags and left the airport. So it was a close call, but yeah, it was pretty exciting at the time.
And after that happened, was it just easy mood, or was it like, I told you not to take that out?
There was a tense moment, let's say.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that after all that she'd taken it out, but there you go. She has a mind of her own.
So basically the book is about like tales of like you being like smuggling drugs, and how much were you guys smuggling at that point?
We weren't really smuggling drugs for profit. We would just
for a party.
We would just go to places, and we wanted to do psychedelics in these places we went to, and so we took our own supply. So it wasn't that we were international drug smugglers per se. It was just mostly personal amounts, but there were a few close calls and a few exciting moments.
What were you guys smuggling that time? How much was it?
It was about 50 hits of MDA and 50 hits of acid and a little bit of this and that, a smorgasbord.
Fun time. You're like
we were meeting up with 6 other people, and we were going to be there for 2 weeks, so we needed we didn't want to run out of anything. Yeah,
you're like the perfect friend and stuff. Travel cross country with drugs.
Oh yeah, everybody's pleased to see me.
Yeah.
We went to Hawaii and I got in touch with a rave collective there because we were going and we wanted to go to some parties, and there was a progressive house rave collective on Maui. So I got in touch with these guys, and I sent them a copy of my book, Rave Culture and Insider's Overview by Jimi Fritz. And they welcomed us with, open arms, and they were all in the Navy. So apparently they couldn't do MDMA, although they were full on ravers, with all the gear and the music and the DJ setups, and they were doing parties and club nights. And, there was about as raver as you could get. But they didn't do MDMA because it showed up in their testing for the military, because they were all in the US Navy. So, you know, when we got there, they said, "Oh, we're really pleased to see you." Blah blah blah. They welcomed us like, you know, celebrities. They did a club night for us. They did a party on the beach for us, and they said, "Yeah, we can't do MDMA, but the only drug we can do is LSD, and you can't find that on Maui at all. It doesn't exist." So I said, just so happens that I had 40 hits with me. So they were very pleased about that. We had several very, very memorable parties there.
Well, it's quite the experience you've had. I think one thing that we would have to hit on this podcast to make it a perfect podcast would be if you could tell us how to make a perfect cup of tea.
A perfect cup of tea. Oh, well, it's there's a whole chapter of this at the end of the book. It would take too long to read it, but there are just a lot of very, very critical stages of making a cup of tea, which people, it's far too complex to go into here. I would suggest you buy my book, Confessions of an Ethical Drug Dealer, and the last chapter is called the extra supplementary bonus chapter on how to make a perfect cup of tea. And it'll give you some very, very good tips there. There are so many ways that it can go wrong.
Yeah.
And so I outline all these mistakes that people make, particularly in North America.
Yeah, Americans.
It's a disaster, absolute disaster. You know, I used to order cups of teas in restaurants in North America, and it was just such a traumatic experience that I had to give it up completely. Uh-huh. The worst one is when they bring you the metal pot with lukewarm water in it and a tea bag on the outside of the pot. That's the kiss of death. When you see that, you know that there's no chance, there's no hope. Tea is a fine art.
That is true. That is true. Well, Jimmy, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it so much.
My pleasure. I'd like to leave you with my website, which is jimifritz.ca. If you go to jimifritz.ca, my books are there, my screenplays, my movies, my music videos. I got 24 music videos of original songs. Got all kinds of interesting. It's like a one-stop shopping for all your entertainment needs. So check it out, jimifritz.ca. I also have a YouTube channel called Jimi Fritz.